Hey everyone.
Hey.
So just wait for Graham as he has the discussion items, unless there's anything anyone else wants to add on the agenda and start with. Hey, so now we're all here. Welcome. So this is the 17th of March, 2022 APAC EMEA timed k8s demo. So Graham, you have the first item.
Yep, so just making people aware, we've got the issue, there's an issue open basically to handle how are we going to do chart bumps in the future. And in the power of iteration, the first thing we can immediately do is just kind of have a scheduled job that's going to run once a week. And I'd actually want to discuss this with people here and now about the schedule of it, that will basically open up merge requests automatically to do chart bumps requiring manual review and then just merging. The hope is we do them starting say once a week. We can continue to iterate and improve on that and do them more regularly. And my hope is, and I do have a plan to eventually get them as part of auto deploy completely. So I'm thinking that if I get the chart bump MRs to happen at midnight Monday, or like, 00 on Monday UTC, that'll be 10 a.m. roughly my time. I'll still be under weekend change control lock then, but that does mean I can merge the ones for pre and staging. And then, anyone else who's in EMEA can then merge the production one later on Monday. Does anyone have any better suggestions on when we want to time this? Or does that sound fine? Cool, easy. So the merge request is up to basically add that automation, well, the scripts and the CI jobs. And then once that's reviewed and merged, then I will set up the schedules to do that. And yeah, essentially that'll move us forward with that. So at least then we should be doing regular chart bumps, once a week. As I said, with the power of iteration at the moment, I'm just keeping the workflow that is there and just doing the automated chart bumps. But in the process of discovering this, I did get a little bit sidetracked as usual. I did realize that the charts that are being offered to us now, they're offering it, the GitLab has a Helm package repository built in, and the distribution group is offering us Helm charts in both GitLab.com, in the security mirror, and in dev.gitlab.org through that. And they're actually giving us the Vel versions where they weren't before, I'm pretty sure. So we actually get charts available package charts available to us that match the auto deploy numbers, and they happen at every auto deploy. So once again, this is an FYI. I didn't realize this, and I think it might be a relatively recent development. But the good news is, I think we want to change in the future from chart bumps being based around Git shards, like the SHA of the Git commit, and actually move towards using auto deploy version numbers that, even if we still do it manually as a first step, and then in the future that kind of paves the way from us doing it through auto deploy.
What's the so you mentioned there, like, that we've switched over, like the distribution has made some changes, like what's the actual kind of difference between those?
Sure. So, well, it's not even that they made some changes. Well, I mean, they're offering us the packaged Helm charts. So Helm charts, we can pull them either through Git, so you can directly just Git clone them down, or they can be packaged and deployed through the package registry of the GitLab product. When they're packaged, they're actually a little bit easier for us to consume. So I still think maybe fetching them from the package repository and vendoring them, so we still vendor them and keep a local copy, makes sense, because there's less cleaning and less massaging I have to do of the chart to vendor it. And it includes all the subcharts that are dependent. And the other reason I think it makes sense is, at the moment, if you want to see what's in our GitLab chart, you will look at our deployment. You'll see like a SHA, which is the Git commit in the charts repo, which is fine. That's easy enough to follow and go and figure that out. But as I said, if we could switch that to pulling from the Devel Helm repository and switching to the version number that we're using being actual auto deploy version number. So like the 14.8 point, whatever, and that matches to an auto deploy. It's not like it's an arbitrary, like, honestly, this is semi-arbitrary. As I said, it's just, if we can start doing that, then obviously it means when we do a chart bump, we're pinning it to, I mean, when we do a chart bump now, it's arbitrary. It's just we pick the latest commit, but at least we're matching auto deploy numbers. And then in the future, as I said, that paves way for us to be on track to add charts as an auto deployable component.
Henry, do you want to verbalize your point?
Yes.
Sure.
I have one question, because I think the current situation is that most developers can't see the ops pipelines for Kubernetes workloads, right? So it's mostly us, I guess, who can review the actual diff jobs for chart bumps, also for other changes. For instance, if the registrar team does a chart change and then we need to do a chart bump, and then we need to review how it looks like in the diff jobs, they can't see it, right? They don't know what's happening. So we need to assess if that is maybe what they wanted to, but we are not always that much involved in chart changes, right? I'm also not sure for the distribution team if they can see those pipelines. And maybe it would be good that not we are the only reviewers of that, because we don't do most of the chart changes, right? And it's often, when reviewing chart changes, it's often hard to assess, okay, is this exactly what we are expecting and want with this change? Maybe it would be good to have the actual developers and distribution team to also look into the diff jobs to verify that it's okay. Because else we end up to be the only reviewers of the diff jobs, at least. I don't know, it could help in general, I think, to have more visibility on this, but I don't know if this is possible from a security perspective.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Graham. Go.
Yeah, I think getting developers to review the diffs would be good. I definitely wouldn't want it to block us on that, though, like saying we need their approval to that, because I just think their interest and potentially their ability to say confidently, especially at the start, might be not that strong. But yeah, getting visibility on the diffs, I think would be good, but I think Emmy was about to go into what the ramifications or the reasons behind us hiding that are.
Yeah, I think so. Ruben's been sort of looking into this stuff, and it is a little, there are risks associated with opening all this stuff up. So it's certainly not a trivial change. I wonder if we have an option, or whether it'd be worth trying to explore whether we do have an option of somehow making this so that it does work more closely with how a code change works, right? Because I think it's in a way, a very similar problem where we need someone sort of outside of the team to say, here's the change I want to make, it's the right change. And then we are kind of the coordinators of when that happens. And at the moment, like, it was interesting actually, yesterday I was reading through some of the GitLab personas, and it's interesting to sort of look at where in delivery we fit inside the personas, because we actually hold multiple roles. So we call ourselves release managers. We're not really a release manager in the GitLab persona sort of definition of a release manager, but we are the definition of a developer who wants to get a change out. And we're also the platform engineer who does the coordination of getting that change out. So maybe on this one, that's might help kind of find help us start to think about where can we start splitting some of these responsibilities. Because yeah, having the people who've made the change actually verify that this would be a great improvement.
Jav, correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote the bot that does the like commenting, doesn't it? Didn't you? Where does that source code live?
Commenting on what? Sorry.
So you know how when we have a pipeline on ops, it runs the diff and then it comments on the original MR.
Yeah, that's no good, man. So I wrote the initial iteration. I guess I'll use that word of that. And it's a shell script that runs on ops.
That's fine.
That does some fuzzy matching of the Helm diff output and posts the result back to .com. Later, someone who doesn't work here anymore started this Woodhouse project, and we've continued to maintain that. And now Woodhouse has the ability to post back to the .com MR, and most projects are using that, but it doesn't give you, it doesn't have the details of, like, you know, contextual details for this is a Helm diff, so I'm going to do some fuzzy matching. It doesn't do that. So we left the janky shell script approach there. Sorry, I was looking at something else. What's the context related to those notifications?
Well, just like it's I guess it's a case of, could we just modify that shell script to begin to actually paste the diffs in, but then like paste the diffs that it sees. But then the question becomes, if by doing that, are we somehow violating these clauses that we have around security? Because like if we can't give people, it's just flat out too dangerous. Okay.
I think so. I mean, like if a secret leaks, it's too much trouble for us. So I don't think, I mean, what we could do is, I mean, I don't see an option.
If GitLab had private comments, maybe it would be better, but
that would be cool. Yeah, confidential comment would be awesome. Then we could do it.
Yeah. Okay.
For this one, Graham, go ahead, Ruben. That's relevant.
Sorry, I was just going to say a confidential comment would still be visible to every single GitLab team member. So
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's not.
Still.
I think our job logs, I don't know on ops. I assume they aren't visible, but we would need to check that.
That's the security. That's the data that we actually can't make public. So I've just linked in the agenda this issue that Ruben opened, which I think has a lot of the context on why this is non-trivial to change.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest so actually a couple of things on what you've shown us so far, Graham. So I'm going to open an epic we can put on release velocity, and actually, because I think that the change you've made is a great first iteration, right? It certainly helps us, I think for a little context for everyone who hasn't enjoyed chart bumps, is we don't tend to do them very often. So oftentimes when we need to put something out that has a chart bump, we'll find we have like a month of changes that need to go out in one go. So doing these a little bit more regularly, hopefully just reduces that batch size and makes things a bit easier. But actually, I think maybe the sort of longer term thing is, how do we get this to auto deploys? How do we switch it so that it fits in the model of all the other code changes we push out to production? And we maybe need to do a little bit of kind of investigation into options there. So I'm going to open this as an epic so that we actually can pull this stuff together and make it visible that we're looking at this. And then we can open up some issues for what's the next piece to discuss. Like, this sounds like a good problem to try and solve. And then how do we do we switch over to the kind of packaged Helm charts and pull those, we can actually have issues for these changes.
I have one more comment to this. If we want to go to auto deploys for chart bumps, then we need to make sure that a chart bump as it is doesn't change any default configurations, right? Mostly we do chart bumps to add a new configuration item, which then wants to be set, right? But we need to make sure that this configuration item then doesn't change something in the same run when we bump a chart, right? So this is, I don't know if we can guarantee this. This is something that what the developers of the chart bump need to keep in mind. If they add something there, they need to make it in a way that it doesn't change the behavior of .com at the same time. And you need to be very careful with that one.
Yeah, I think it definitely would not be a case of we just turn it on without telling people, because I know the kind of the safety and the cadence in which they do breaking changes, or not necessarily breaking changes, but the testing and the safety we have around it. We would need a discussion, right, with distribution to make sure that's right, and like really making sure everyone is thinking about this is going to be auto deployed. What's this potentially breaking? It needs to be in the forefront of everyone's mind, because it's not at the moment, which is fine because we don't auto deploy it, so that's not needed.
I had one question. This might not make sense because I don't know really how this whole system works, but so we can't have a tool that sort of does any kind of fuzzy matching and pulls the diff out of the job logs and posts it somewhere, because then you have the risk that it doesn't match it properly and pulls out something that should not be. But can the whoever is generating the diff and adds it to the job logs, can that same resource post it directly to the MR? I don't know if this makes sense.
It already does post the job log direct. So there's a link directly to the diff from the MR on .com that you can see the job log. It's just that you have to click through it. Is that what you mean?
But the job lives on ops, right? So you need to have permissions to view it on ops.
Everyone with a .com email address, I think, can see this, although I'm not sure what the permissions are set to on that project. Maybe someone can try who doesn't have, who's not an infra, see if they can access the job log.
Which project are we talking about?
This would be the k8s workloads projects.
GitLab.com.
Yeah. They're set to internal, right? Not private. I can check.
Yeah. All the developers I talk to can't get access to those job logs on ops.
Okay.
And I guess that's
I wasn't
question.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that's the clarification or the question. Are they allowed to have that? Or it sounds like they distinctly are not allowed to have access to that. I mean, at the end of the day,
they're private. I guess we made that decision a while back, probably for compliance, but
it's definitely, it's related to this issue 2218, right? There is stuff in those, there could be stuff in those logs that we don't want to make public for everyone, and if we did, we make other problems much bigger. So I think we should put some of this into an issue, because I know we've got another discussion that we want to get through in time, but I do want to just make sure that we so in terms of this first iteration, so Graham, have a think about what sort of process this will look like and where people will know about that. Like how will someone know who's going to do the EMEA? Is it the same person? Are you assigning it to somebody, or how does this stuff actually?
We make it release managers, but then if it's release managers, is everyone who's a release manager confident in actually interpreting one of these and things like that? So
let's assume not. If we're saying it's someone who needs to evaluate chart changes, then I think we need to think about who is going to be who do we have can do that, or do we need to train more people?
So at the moment, it's just going to assign it to every SRE we have in delivery. And then whoever picks it up and merges it. If we want something more formalized than that, I'm happy for any idea. I could it could randomly pick an SRE, or it's said.
Any opinions, Ahmad, Henry? You two are probably the two who have the sort of the you'll be the two, I guess, who start your week every week, and it will be available. And I guess it's like, how much do you want to just see how the week goes, or set like one of you to do?
I think normally we just assigned all SIEs to just review it, and then someone is picking it up. And also it doesn't hurt if more than one is looking into it sometimes. So it's okay to, I think, have all of them being assigned to it as reviewers.
If one doesn't get merged one week, it's probably not the end of the world either, right? The automation will work and just make a bigger one next week. So it's probably no worse than what we're currently doing, really, which is we generally do a chart bump and get every other SRE to review it pretty much. So.
Oh, okay, good stuff. So I'll open an Epic. Graham, maybe I'll just catch up with you, like, or ping you like early next week and stuff, so we can figure out like what are the issues, like to start moving this forward, so that we can get closer to auto deploys. Like it has a lot of similarities to what we've had to do on everything else going into auto deploys. So I think it's certainly an interesting and useful project. Awesome. Do you want to move to the next discussion point?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting issue. So I noticed there's this flag that we can pass on release tools pipelines, which gets passed down to, I think, to the k8s workloads pipelines, I believe, or it's, sorry, deployer, so that basically we can allow k8s workloads pipelines to fail. I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the history behind this is when we started the k8s, the Kubernetes migration for services, we wanted, sometimes I guess they wouldn't work, and it was okay to like set this flag and just basically allow Kubernetes deployments to fail and continue moving forward. And I initially thought that now with everything in Kubernetes, that there would be no scenario that we would ever want Kubernetes deployments to fail or think it was okay for them to fail. But on the discussion on the issue below, and I do thank everyone for contributing, has kind of changed my mind a little bit on that. Maybe there are kind of scenarios in which we should use that flag. But I guess the interesting thing, especially in highlight of the incident where I found this out and what it was used in, it's worth noting that when you use this flag, it just means that the Kubernetes, apply job can fail. Like it could fail and the pipeline continues. What that can mean, though, is if the Kubernetes deployment pipeline fails, and in the case for this specific incident, it was failing before it even tried to deploy. It was just like, I'm trying to get a lock on the system so I can deploy it, and I can't get the lock. So bypassing that and say continuing deployment and deploying to another environment actually had the effect of that environment was never deployed to. So it was, I think it was staging or something, and it was like we just skipped staging and went straight past it, which once again, maybe that was valid. It might have been valid in that specific case. But I just also then discovered that the documentation around this flag is light. And, once again, it's not immediately clear that just like, oh, I'll just, toggle this flag on and, I can continue on. I guess it was just highlighting the fact that, in this case, you did actually skip deploying to an entire environment. So you're running QA tests and everything afterwards, but you weren't actually running them against the code you were, deploying to. And it was because Helm was stuck in a stupid reason, which, whatever. So yeah, I just, if anyone has got any thoughts for like how we kind of reconcile this, it might just be, I need to do some documentation on Runbook and just saying like, please be aware that if you don't actually see certain messages, then the deployment never actually made it to the cluster, and just be aware of that. Maybe that's the simplest solution.
I think we are in the same situation with config changes. When we do a config change MR, then a pipeline is starting and it's taking a long time until it went through all of the environments. And sometimes you just don't watch it because it starts and runs fine, and then you don't, close the tab, and then you don't check if it really finished, right? And it might be that it just didn't do it in one of the environments at the end. If you don't check for it manually, there's no notification, nothing, which is telling you that. So you need, if you do this, check the pipeline manually till the end if it really succeeded, else you will never know. And the same is true if you try to apply this flag, right? If you take this flag for auto deployments to skip or to allow a failure in a Kubernetes deploy, then you should know you need to manually check if it really works, what you are doing there. You are in a special situation, I think. I think we need to really make this clear in documentation. If we are using this flag, that you manually need to make sure that everything worked as expected by checking for it. So we are kind of in the same situation like for config changes here, just that it's for a whole deployment then, which takes even longer. And I think I saw one of the, I mentioned this in the issue, one reason why we maybe might need this flag, because if we, for instance, have a problem with one zone in GCP, which makes it impossible to deploy there, then we might still want to drain this zone maybe in HA proxy, but we need to deploy maybe, and maybe the situation keeps on going for a few days until Google fixes it, and we need to be able to deploy, right? And in this case, it would be cool to ignore errors for this zone and Kubernetes deployments to be able to deploy and use this flag maybe. So I think that's why we shouldn't take it away, because else we would be stuck in this situation, right? I don't see other reasons to use it. This I think is the most urgent one where we might need it, and hopefully not very often. But if we then use it, we need to know, we need to check the whole deployment pipeline for any possible problems or skipped environments and stuff like that.
So yeah, like it's absolute perfect sense. You're right on the money. The case of clustered down that we know is down, we need to continue. This is my personal opinion. I really get a bit funny about like running pipelines with different flags and different inputs into them and getting different results. And I'm really starting to feel like that's causing us a lot of these kind of making more problems than it's solving. If there is a cluster down, I'm kind of like, this is just a thought experiment. What about a Git commit? Like we actually put an MR and say, we are going to disable the jobs for this cluster. You know, shouldn't that be what we really are doing? We're tracking that we're disabling it in Git. We could rearrange the CI file, so maybe there's just one line you got to toggle of which clusters are available or aren't available. But it's just interesting because we are very pipeline focused. But once again, it's like we just build these pipelines with these inputs and changing the inputs to getting different outputs, which makes sense. But you know, it makes every pipeline hard to determine, like predict what is it going to do. And I'm always kind of like, should we actually enforce a change in Git? You know, I know it's longer, and I hate with the k8s workload stuff, especially the pipelines take forever. It's so long, but it's like, if you want to disable a cluster, to me, that is a state change that should actually be, you know, reviewed, merged, be in the Git log, then later on you actually re-enable that. But at the flip side, I do know, you know, especially in these situations where it's likely an emergency, that it's a hard thing to do. Yeah, like, oh, I got to open an MR and, you know, wait for the diff jobs and wait for the pipeline to be green.
I think in that scenario, I think that's a great suggestion, because actually I think in that case we're talking about two emergencies, right? Because it's like Henry's got a great use case of like a zone is out, right? That's an emergency, and we also have to do an emergency deployment. Like it feels like I would hope that we probably don't have two emergencies on top of each other too often. So yeah, that might be a great suggestion. I mean, I like the MR. Like the other one maybe is we could rename the flag so it's more obvious. It's not allow k8s failures. It's like, you know, Kubernetes cluster unavailable, you know, something specific. But yes, I think I prefer the MR suggestion.
That would be the other option would be to like change the flag so you actually have to pass the cluster that it's allowed to fail on. And so at least you're kind of targeting it, because, you know, you can say like, oh, cluster C is down, I'm going to toggle this flag, and it just allows every cluster to fail.
But I think I guess what I more want to avoid is separating out the use case where we've gone, this has failed, and people mistaking this for like, oh, okay, I will allow that, versus actually an deliberate, like this scenario where a zone is unavailable and I still want to make a decision to deploy. Like, so I think the naming, I don't think it's super clear from the current name.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, basically all it does is it just sets the allow failure flag on the deployer job for k8s, kicks off k8s workloads. That's all it does. So it just allows that CI job to fail. So the whole deployer pipeline will go green, even if you never actually deployed anything.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. So should we remove the flag, and put a runbook in instead to give a guide? Because like, I mean, realistically, this won't happen very often, right? Like it's not that often an entire zone should be unavailable and we still want to be deploying without it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, that it's not very often occurring. And then you need to ask yourself, okay, what do we then in this case, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the experience, and then you start looking through runbooks or examples before. So having a very prominent runbook example of how to come up with an MR to disable running in a specific cluster, for instance, that would be then very important to have.
Because we may have other considerations as well if a whole zone's down, right? Like we may also need to just check we have capacity on the remaining zones. So I don't think it's just isolated to we skip on the deployment and we keep going. It feels like that would be a bigger infra decision. Like, you know, do we still have capacity in order to do a deployment, for example, right? Like, because when we deploy, we reduce capacity. So I think there's probably some extra stuff we probably want to mention in a runbook anyway.
It's worth mentioning both of these issues, actually, interestingly enough, have very much solidified my wants to actually improve the GitLab com repo this year. I really want to get us away from Helm so we don't have these problems of Helm just failing on us for no reason. And actually thinking about the diffs problem as well, if we go back to, if we get all the secrets out of that repo and we get that to actually using raw manifests that we generate and commit to repo, then the git diff, like we see with the chart bumps, becomes the diff. We don't need the diff output from ops, and therefore that whole problem goes away as well, because it'll be up to people who can people. It basically it just becomes code that you commit. So anyway.
Yeah, great idea. Let's get some of this stuff into issues as well so we can prioritize. Like Henry, you made a really great point earlier about when config pipelines fail, there's no output. Like that feels like something we should change, right? Because actually we're not like, it's kind of a model that we actually want to adopt for other things where someone pushes a change, it's almost a self-serve deployment, but we give them zero visibility, which seems a little unfair. So that would also maybe be a good one for us to actually get in an issue and figure out how we can actually like help people with that stuff as well.
Yeah,
I think simply what we would.
So we see if a pipeline fails if we check the MR. I mean, we see that the MR had a failed pipeline, but because it takes so long, sometimes you just close it because you merge and think it's fine, and then you forget. So in this case, if you want to have a reminder, then it would be something like a Slack notification, probably.
Yeah, like we could maybe have a different channel or
failure,
something like that. Well, it may be even on success, right? Like it might actually be interesting for people to see, like how many config changes are going out or failing to go out, or you know, like I don't think we have any visibility of that stuff as a kind of an overall.
Could we add on success and on failure jobs to using the release tools rake task to send it to announcements channel? Like I feel like getting some announcements in there on when config changes or just K8 workloads, pipelines changes happen wouldn't be too bad, right? I mean, we put it in another channel.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, I mean, let's discuss. Like I
sure.
Certainly either. Like, I mean, it seems we should put it somewhere, right? So
I can open an issue to look for a solution for this,
yeah,
like notifications for Kubernetes workloads pipelines.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks, Henry.
And if people's Slack handles are the same as their GitLab handles, which I don't think they are, unfortunately, we could actually ping the people who merged them, but I guess that's impossible. So,
well, we could mention a name and people could set a Slack notification rule if they wanted to get them. Well, let's discuss that other issue because I think there's lots of options we could do to improve that stuff as well. So does that give you an answer, Graham, on like a way to move this issue forwards?
I think so. I think it's a documentation and a runbook, honestly, and then probably getting everyone feedback on that runbook and making it clear that either this is what the flag does, or we are actually going to get rid of the flag and replace it with a different process. And I think as long as everyone looks at that and feels they're confident and they understand what that process is and why that process is, that'll probably be the way I would think. Correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not what we kind of took away from that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would propose removing a flag and see how people feel about that. Like I think based on our experience so far is it's more dangerous having it than not, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. Awesome. Is there anything else anyone wanted to discuss today? Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, thanks very much for the discussions, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Take care, everyone. Bye.